John Puxty, BMP TV, Brussels, speaking with Nick Griffin, MEP. You recently went to Syria, Nick. As the saying goes, travel broadens the mind. What did you learn?
Well, John, I learnt that I was simultaneously right and wrong in what I've said about Islam in the past. I was absolutely right and had this confirmed by speaking to Syrian Muslims of several different sects in my analysis of the fundamentalists' interpretation of Islam, whereby, and particularly the Quran, whereby there's eternal hate and war between them and everybody else, particularly us as Christian unbelievers, that the moderate verses are overwritten by the verses of the sword, the ones written later on, and it makes the whole thing a menace to all other peoples and particularly a menace to Britain.
Well, theology can be a very boring subject. Could you please just give us one example of this?
Yeah, the classic is Surah 5, verse 32, which is the one that Tony Blair quoted straight after 9/11 and 7/7. And he quoted it, and Cameron quotes it, all the others. They say that whosoever takes a life, it's as if he'd taken the life of the whole world. So they say this means Islam says you can't kill. The actual whole verse says whoever takes a life not in retaliation for a life or in retaliation for corruption in the land, it's as if they kill the whole world. And this piece in the middle means that in retaliation for killing a Muslim, they can kill people. So we bomb Afghanistan, they can come and kill us. And in particular, in retaliation for corruption in the land, which can be everything in the eyes of the hardliners, from usury, for instance, or having women walking around not veiled, anything like that can be corruption in the land, then they're entitled to kill. And it only says you can't kill innocent people. To them, the innocents are strict Wahhabi Muslims. Everyone else is guilty and therefore can be killed.
So, qualifying Islam with the word fundamentalist for you,
as I am now, yeah.
Which is a new concept for you.
Yeah.
You've really shifted your position from your previous stated position on Islam, where you describe this as a wicked and vicious faith.
Yeah, as I said, I was right and wrong. I was right about the innate extremism of large numbers of Muslims and Muslim communities in Britain, because they come from this, they're informed by this Wahhabi version of Sunni Islam. I was right that it's a huge threat to Britain and the British people, because it's popular and it's very well funded, and these people are funded enormously, particularly by the Saudi Arabians, the other Gulf states. So although there are moderate Muslims in Britain, their voice is overridden by the sheer amount of money that the hardliners have got to pump into radicalising the whole community. And I was right that many of them deceive us. So when the Muslim Council of Britain put spokesmen on television and so on, they're the ones who, like Tony Blair, use that twisted version of chapter 5, verse 32, and they use it in order to deceive us, to lull us into a false sense of security, while they keep on with their much higher birth rate, with continued immigration, with conversion, and with just getting more and more money and power. They continue taking over our society. So I was right about that. I was wrong to lump all Muslims together, even in fact all Sunnis. I met Sunnis in Damascus who are absolutely 110% behind the Assad government, because they want a moderate form of Sunnism, more so the Shia, the Alawites and the other religious groups in Syria. And looking at particularly at the Shia and the Alawites and so on, you're dealing with a form of Islam which has been reformed. Their view of things very often is tempered by centuries of interpretation, by the analysis and how many angels can dance on a pinhead in Christian terms, by these analyses over centuries, which turn Syria into a genuinely tolerant and absolutely secular society where Muslims are the majority in their different groups, but everyone is tolerated, everyone's respected. And it's that tempered version of Islam I didn't know really was there, because I looked at the ones who claim to be moderates in Britain and they're lying. These people are actually moderates. Coming back to this chapter 5, verse 32, they point out that the very start of that verse says it was ordained to the children of Israel that you mustn't go around killing people unless. And they say it's ordained, it's past tense, so it's something in the past which related to the ancient Jews, so it doesn't relate to us. Now, the fundamentalists, the Wahhabis, say, no, you're wrong, you can't mess around with the Quran, and if you do, we'll hack your head off. But the fact is that the people who say we can interpret the Quran are prepared to fight the extremists, and they are fighting the extremists right now. The Wahhabis say that this interpreting the Quran is takfir, it's heresy, and heretics or unbelievers should be killed just like us. They're all kafir, they should all be killed. So the people who would be the victims of that, they're not just sitting around, they're actively fighting radicalised Wahhabi Islam, whereas every politician in the West, virtually, Cameron, Haig, all the rest of them, they're appeasing Wahhabi Islam here at home. They're in its pockets. Whole sections of the Tory cabinet are owned by the Saudi Arabians, who are the ultimate in Wahhabis, that's obvious. So while our politicians are selling us down the river, there are Muslims in the Middle East literally fighting, not just for the survival of their community and our rights, and their rights, but also actually fighting long term exactly the same war that we're fighting, and you have to give them credit for that. It's only fair.
So this battle that's going on in Syria is actually good for Syria long term.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain to us why this matters to us here in Britain?
Yeah, indeed, because roughly speaking, 2/3 of all the mosques in Britain, and really all the big ones, are funded by Saudi Arabia or Qatar, the other Gulf states, who are run by a Wahhabi clique. It's a crazed fanatic sect running these societies which have enormous amounts of oil, and they're the ones who are influencing and training and bringing up the next generation of most young Muslims in Britain. There's a sect which basically took this Wahhabi concept from Saudi Arabia to the Indian subcontinent in the times of the British Raj. It's called Deobandism. And they're also enormously powerful, particularly in the Pakistani community in Britain. It's a virus, and it's the thing which in its most political form means they want to take over our country. In its crudest form, it's the thing which creates the hatred and contempt of unbelievers and women that leads to grooming of our girls, to race attacks on our young lads and so on. And even the more moderate ones from that community, the people like Hizb ut-Tahrir through to the Muslim Council of Britain, they all want the same aim, which is the complete Islamification of our society under this extraordinarily harsh Wahhabi rule. They just, go about it a little bit more carefully. So it's a huge problem. The young people growing up in that community are absolute time bombs. Even the ones who aren't radicalised this week, in 6 weeks later can be. That's the way it goes once they sort of get on this conveyor belt process of radicalisation. And they're particularly radicalised when our ruling elite has an insane foreign policy of, for instance, bombing Afghanistan and killing wedding parties in Pakistan with drones because they suspect they might be Taliban, because they went to war in Afghanistan in order to help various banks and oil companies put a gas pipeline through Afghanistan. So while that radicalisation is going on, it makes these people's presence in Britain extraordinarily dangerous. So it means that in fighting them and holding them back, the Syrians are fighting our battle for us.
So your position is roughly the same as the EDL then. They marched with the Muslims in East Anglia recently. Fundamentally, you agree with the EDL, and it's only the extremists that are the problem. So all Britain has to do is send an army to where the extremists train and kill them, and the problem is solved.
No, because the extremists who are training, they're the absolute sort of the point. They're the tip of the spear, but there's a much bigger spear of really a whole community behind them. That's the problem. The people it's very interesting, the people that the EDL idiots marched with in Ipswich, a group called Jimas, are actually hardline Wahhabi fanatics, disguised as moderates, funded by Saudi Arabia, and they're part of a conveyor belt of Wahhabi terrorism. As an example, one of their conferences was addressed by the man who went on to murder Richard Pearl, the Jewish journalist in Afghanistan, who was beheaded on the internet. That's the kind of people that the EDL were suckered into working with. It's known in Islam as taqiyya, and it's religious deceit. So no, it's not just a few hardliners out there. Every time we go into their countries, we only make it worse because we rally their whole community around them. It's this whole religious philosophy is the trouble.
Could you explain more precisely what you mean by taqiyya?
Yeah, taqiyya is a concept actually originated with the Shia when they were the minority in many Sunni areas, that if you sort of conceal what you really believe, you're allowed to. And it comes fundamentally again from the Quran, that Surah 4 verse 101 says you're not to blame if when you're in the land of the unbelievers you shorten the prayers. So they've taken from this the idea that when they're weak they can lie to the unbelievers, they can cheat and so on. It's only when they're strong enough, when they're 10% or more of the population, are they ordained by their reading of the Quran to fight us. That's taqiyya.
So coming back to the main point here, you're still actually agreeing with the EDL that it's only the extremists that need to be rooted out. We need to destroy their training grounds in Afghanistan, for instance.
No, because it's not just a handful of extremists. It's a whole section of Islam, this Sunni Wahhabism. You're talking about millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people. You're talking about probably several million in Britain, tens of thousands in Western Europe. You're talking about a very large population. The population, if you like, they provide the sympathetic sea in which the particularly radical suicide bomber fish swim, and you have to deal with the problem as a whole. Firstly, by understanding that when it's attacked physically, when we bomb Afghanistan or wherever, or went into Iraq, it actually radicalises an even bigger section. It helps the recruiters, the terrorists, recruit more young men. It helps them get in more money. It earns them sympathy. You can't kill an ideology by killing, which is held by millions of people, by killing a few people. You can only fight an ideology by taking away the thing which allows it to radicalise people, so getting the West the hell out of the Middle East and out of Muslim countries, so they haven't got such a wind-up for young men. You know, they see Muslims killed on television, they blame us, they want to go to war. We need to do that. And also, we have to, it's for them, if they're going to soften their religious ways, to do so. Very interestingly, one thing I learnt when I was in Syria is that in, I think, 2002, the Grand Mufti and the Syrian government offered to send as many Sufi, which is a particularly sort of pacifist version of Islam, which verges onto Christianity, as many Sufi imams as Britain could take, they would send to replace the Wahhabi extremists in our mosques and start teaching what is basically a pacifist version of Islam. The government initially said yes. Apparently MI6 were particularly enthusiastic, the overseas intelligence people, and then it was killed off from on high. No doubt when the subtle Wahhabis like the Muslim Council of Britain started saying to the Labour government, you go down that road, you'll lose our vote. So that came to nothing, but that needs to be, you know, picked up. And really we need to say to those communities, to the Wahhabi communities, the Sunni communities in Britain, you choose, you decide. Are you going to moderate and speak out against terrorism? Absolutely, and against the Wahhabism that creates it. Or if you're going to fudge, if you're not going to be happy with that, you have got to leave this country, the whole lot of you, and not just a handful of extremists.
So the Shia, as far as we're concerned in Britain, where there are 400,000 roughly living here, many of whom have come here to get away from...
Genuine refugees, a lot of them.
These people are really genuine refugees in the true sense, trying to get away from this terror situation. So what you're saying is that basically the Shia are okay.
Well, mass immigration in Britain is wrong. We oppose it. We'd like to reverse it. End of. But yeah, you're right. A lot of Shia are genuine refugees. I would hope if Syria can return to peace, there's a place where Shia Muslims can go and live in a state where Shia Islam is understood and so on. I'd rather they were there than, you know, in Britain, to be blunt. But in the end, yeah, there's 400,000, it's not a huge number, and they don't have an agenda of conquering the West in the way that the Sunnis, the Wahhabi Sunnis do. So if you look at 9/11, 7/7, Afghanistan, the terrorism against British troops there, that's by Sunni Wahhabis, founded by Saudi Arabia. Why blame the Shia? If you look at the preachers of hate, Omar Bakri, Abu Hamza, Anjem Chowdhury, these are Sunni Wahhabis funded by Saudi Arabia. It's unfair. Why blame the Shia? The killers of Lee Rigby are Wahhabis with a fierce Wahhabi interpretation of the Quran. Why blame the Shia? The groomers, the racist attackers. Invariably, this comes from communities in Britain who are Sunni and influenced by these Wahhabi mosques. So it's morally wrong to blame the Shia and other immigrants for what is done by this particular group. It's wrong to pick on the innocent, and I've seen for myself they are innocent, and I've learnt for myself they're innocent. It's morally wrong and it's tactically wrong, because if you attack them or lump them all together, well then some of their young people, because especially some of their faith is softer, they're going to probably end up with the extremists anyway. So it's crazy on all grounds, and it's better to say Britain has a particular problem with Sunni Wahhabism and we've got to deal with it.
So Sunni Islam, influenced by Wahhabism, is the real problem for Britain, and other Muslims are not so much of a danger to us.
Exactly, which is what makes it particularly dangerous to be doing what Cameron and Haig and the others are doing in Syria, to try to interfere, to hand Syria, at present a secular and tolerant non-sectarian state, over to these Sunni crazies. Well, like the one I interviewed near the failed suicide bomber, they make no bones about it. When they finish Syria off, they're going to come for us here in the West. So it makes it particularly dangerous, and that's the Saudi Arabians buying British politicians, the United States military-industrial complex buying British politicians, their Zionist allies terrifying British politicians with the power of the mass media, people like Murdoch and Desmond, all these people together getting us into this crazy war.
So really, Cameron and his cabinet have got us into a very, very dangerous situation. What do you suggest is the way for us to get out of this awful impasse?
That's the important thing. Where do we go from here to get out of it? First of all, stop winding up Sunni Muslims and allowing the real hardliners to recruit from the general population by getting out of their countries and stopping interfering in the Islamic world on behalf of the United States and Israel and oil companies. That's the first thing. Secondly, stay out of Syria and pray to God that Assad wins, because he's not perfect. I think that regime made lots of mistakes. I wouldn't necessarily have liked to live under that regime. They openly admit that. Not perfect, but a natural friend to the West. Syria looks westward. It could be a modern, industrialised country which didn't need to send people abroad, as economic refugees. They could build Syria up even more if they were left in peace. So we have to hope he wins. The only place that Britain has actually a real interest in, if you like, interfering in the Middle East, not with troops but in political ways, is Saudi Arabia and the little Gulf states like Bahrain and Qatar that it supports. Because here you've got a tiny Sunni Wahhabi overlordship ruling and oppressing all the women, the large Shia majority in those countries, and they're the ones who are funding terrorism, not just in Syria, but they're funding it in the West, and they're funding the Islamisation of the West. They're the real problem. And we should interfere there as far as this, that we should organise with the West, in an ideal world, an embargo of no technology transfer to Saudi Arabia, no help to Saudi Arabia, no aid, no help, no trade with Saudi Arabia, even for oil, as far as we can possibly do it, until Saudi Arabia reforms, gives rights to women and to their captive, oppressed majorities, not because that is our business, but because in doing that it would moderate those states, and in particular until they stop funding terror and Islamisation in the West. Until they do that, Saudi Arabia is the great enemy of Britain, France, America, the enemy in fact of the whole of damned humanity, because of this pure poison, this appalling thing masquerading as a religion that they're working to force on the whole world. And we should aim to bring down the House of Saud and replace it with something better, or let the Saudis replace it with something better. And finally, we need to simply say our foreign aid budget, £14 billion a year, money down the drain. We're going to spend it on sending home, in the most decent, easy, softest way possible, still compulsory, every last Wahhabi, every last member of a Wahhabist family, and every community that comes in Britain from that religious background, which will not absolutely condemn and abhor not just actually terrorism, not just killing innocents with their weasel words, but the whole of the Wahhabi Islamist project. If they condemn that, then they shouldn't have come here in such huge numbers in the first place. We've discussed this many times before, the BNP. They are here, we've got to put up with it. If they won't condemn it, their presence in our country will condemn their kids and our kids to an eternity of civil war and disaster, and we should simply pay them to go home, every last one.
Right, thank you very much, Nick. That explains everything.
Thank you.